Hello. Welcome to today's AT&T Cyber Threat Report. This is January 26, 2012. And joining us today, we have Jim Clausing. Jim is our lead malware analyst. And welcome, Jim. What are you planning to discuss today?
Thanks, Brian. I have two things I want to talk about today. The first one is some reports that Symantec is basically advising people not to use pcAnywhere anymore. Second one is some exploits in the wild for covered with one of the Microsoft patches from a couple weeks ago.
Okay. Those should be interesting. Actually, pcAnywhere is one we've seen evidence of attack activity toward it for a while now. This is perhaps something different. It'll be interesting to talk about that. We have a new member joining us today, Matt Keyser. Matt is a relatively new addition to our team. He's got a strong background in security analysis, and we welcome him. And he's helping with several aspects of our security analysis at this point. Welcome, Matt. And what do you plan to discuss today?
I'm going to be talking about Anonymous, denial of service attacks, and the new version of the low-orbit ion cannon tool that has surfaced in the last few days. Okay, that sounds like it will be interesting as well. Look forward to it. John Hogoboom is joining us today. He is a regular on the program. He's a lead security analyst and what I'll describe as an innovator. I guess any security analyst needs to be an innovator in their work, but welcome, John. What do you plan to discuss?
Hey, Brian. Today we're going to go over the trends we're seeing malware-wise in the spam that we collect. And there's a couple of little hiccups in there this week, so that'll be interesting to take a look at. And we're going to take a look at an older type of sample that's been around for a long time, but is still getting spammed out, so I wanted to take a look at it. And it's called MyDoom. Probably heard about it before. It's a mass mailing worm. But we've been picking it up, so I wanted to take a closer look at it and kind of show people how it works. So we're going to take a closer look at that one.
And I'm Brian Rexroad, and I'll cover the internet weather for today. We have a couple of interesting topics that we can touch on there. And I also would like to remind you, if you'd like to contact us, maybe you have some feedback or some questions or even a correction, something we may have said not quite correctly, please let us know. You can reach us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. And so let's go ahead and pass over to Jim here. And Jim, you mentioned pcAnywhere. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Symantec released a security bulletin earlier this week, Tuesday, related to some remote execution and local file tampering vulnerabilities in pcAnywhere. But advising people first to update to the latest version, which is, I think, 12.5.3 or something like that. There's also been a lot of talk, various news groups and mailing lists about completely dumping pcAnywhere. Apparently, the source code to pcAnywhere was stolen about 2006. Product that been out there in that, people have been using the old versions for a long time. So this latest vulnerability has gotten the attention of the bad guys again. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in some of our data, I don't have the graph to show here, but in some of our data, we've seen some increased scanning just before the release of this bulletin.
Yeah, I was just sort of looking at that as we speak here, and there is some evidence of scanning activity, but I have to admit, that this is an application much like we've talked about many times, like virtual network computing or remote desktop protocol. Anything that provides remote access to a computer is one that typically gets targeted. So this one isn't particularly different in that respect.
Right, but the big thing is that this new remote execution vulnerability that was found in it is a significant vulnerability, and so if people have exploits for that, if they can find it, likelihood of getting in now goes up.
Absolutely.
We've actually seen folks, and even some Symantec, although I didn't see it in writing any place, but I've heard some folks from Symantec recommending that maybe it's time to put pcAnywhere to bed.
Well, we'll see how that progresses. I think so long as there's a user base, perhaps they'll be continuing to use that.
Yeah, well, because it is still included in some of their Alteris products, so you may not even notice it under the pcAnywhere name, but it's been incorporated in the Alteris line, and I don't have the names of the two products in the Alteris line that contain it off the top of my head. But
it's interesting.
Anyway, so definitely you should keep your eye open for scanning on port 5631, and if you've got pcAnywhere, time to be worried about it. You should absolutely, if you're still running it, be updating it to.
All right, very good, Jim. Thanks for that. The next item, you had something related to Microsoft?
Yeah. Microsoft, earlier this month, with their monthly patches, they released MS-12-004 that covered three CVEs were covered by that bulletin. One of them had to do with the way that Windows Media Player handled MIDI input there, and just today, the folks at Trend Micro posted this blog, saw some evidence of an exploit in the wild, actually on a web page, some embedded JavaScript on the web page that would fire off Media Player and exploit this MIDI vulnerability. And, we always urge you to make sure that you're patching your Windows systems in a timely fashion. This one, the MIDI vulnerability, which is one that I used to play around with MIDI a lot, but I hadn't really thought about MIDI vulnerabilities in quite a while. But this one is being actively exploited in the wild, so if you haven't patched it yet, it's one up your priority list.
This is one that I have to admit, I find this kind of amazing that, regardless of the application, so long as it can be executed via some, external link, and there really are very few applications that would be isolated from, being able to access it over some type of web interface. I mean, who would have thought a music interface is going to be, an avenue for remote execution and attack? I think it's enlightening in a general sense as much as anything else. Great. Thank you for that, Jim. And let's go ahead and pass this over to Matt. Matt, there have been another rash of attacks over the last week or so. Looking forward to a little discussion on this. What can you tell us?
Well, the last few days have been very, very interesting. Most of it was kicked off with the arrests of the operators of MegaUpload.com, which is a pretty well-known file-sharing site. And in the aftermath of that, Anonymous decided to start attacking websites that were related to copyright owners, RIAA, MPAA, Department of Justice was behind the takedown of MegaUpload, and pretty much anyone else who decided to anger them this week. The interesting thing that we're seeing recently is that on Twitter, there have been a few links sent around that have been what Anonymous is calling hives. And you click the link, it brings you to a web page, and JavaScript on the web page immediately starts sending massive amounts of requests to a target site. In some cases, it's justice.gov. Other cases, it's some other target website. This morning, I saw a sample where it was configured to attack the French president's website, who apparently has angered somebody. So Gawker, a pretty well-known blog caught wind of this and posted an article saying that this is an evil new tactic that Anonymous is using, and that they're tricking people into using this. And honestly, to explain it a little bit better, I need to do a little bit more background on what this attack tool is. We're calling it the JS LOIC auto-run version. LOIC stands for Low Orbit Ion Cannon, which is a tool that Anonymous has been using for a couple of years now. It's an actual application that runs on someone's computer. It's written in C#, and it'll send one of 3 different types of traffic to a target machine. Within the last year or so, there's been a version that's come out that's written entirely in JavaScript and can be reloaded just from a web browser. So as long as someone can host an HTML file containing the JavaScript somewhere, they've got an attack platform. The versions that we've seen up until now have mostly been, you go to this website, you enter your target, or it may be automatically placed in there for you, and you have to click to start attacking. These latest versions don't require that. These latest versions, as soon as you go to the page, it starts attacking, and that's the real difference right there, because people can be tricked or misled into supporting a denial of service attack they had no intention of supporting. And it makes it very difficult as well to determine, is someone, an active supporter of what Anonymous is doing, or are they just trying to read the news that Anonymous posted and have, all of a sudden, complicit in this attack. So the traffic generated by this sort of attack, it's all HTTP requests. The refer header in the HTTP request is from the website that's hosting this file, this JavaScript version of LOIC. So if you're aware of where these are located, it's pretty similar. It's pretty easy to tell, this is attack traffic versus this is not attack traffic. As well, there's also a few hints in the URL that's being requested as well. One of which is there's an ID field, and it's a random number. It's actually not a random number. It's the Unix timestamp, and it's used to prevent caching mechanisms from, catching on saying, okay, I've seen this request before, I'm just going to serve the same page. Basically, it makes sure every request is a unique request to the server. And there's also a message field. And what I'm seeing when Anonymous uses this is that they usually throw in a political slogan, something to the effect of, we are Anonymous, we are Legion. Actually, I'm seeing a lot of Spanish messages, and I'm not very fluent in Spanish, but I'm sure that's the same sort of effect. So dejar esta página abierta. I'm seeing a lot of different samples of this, but basically what's going on is between the ID field, the message field, and the fact that the refer tag is, you can tie it directly to the page that it's coming from. It's not difficult to tell that this is attack traffic and differentiate it from legitimate traffic.
Yeah, so it sounds like what they're really trying to do here is send a message, perhaps in an overwhelming way, but not necessarily to make it very or particularly difficult to perhaps mitigate that attack. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Well, mitigating the attack should be fairly simple if you've got the proper methods in place. I mean, I know for a fact there are already snort signatures for LOIC out there, and the traffic is very much somewhere between the original and this new version. If anyone is a target of the attack, they can monitor social media to see where the new hives are, because they have to be, in order for them to be effective, large numbers of people have to know where they're located, so they have to be advertised somehow. You can catch wind of them, you can add them to your block list. From a user standpoint, basically, be careful what you click on Twitter.
Absolutely.
Don't trust the hackers like Twitter. It's really what it boils down.
It's interesting because I was taking a look at the Anonops. There are several accounts, but the main one, sort of the mainstream Twitter account associated with anonymous operations, is the Anonops Twitter account. I think they're on the order of about 200, almost 300,000 followers. That doesn't count the ones that are taking a look at the at activity there. So, as you said, by putting shortened URLs in that don't necessarily, tell you exactly what you're linking to, raise some comment of interest that would perhaps draw somebody toward that link. As they click on that link, next thing you know, they're part of the denial of service attack. Just by being inquisitive, not necessarily standing behind the cause or having even particular knowledge of the cause that's being argued.
Yep.
What surprises me about this is that they're still letting the participant be aware of the fact that they're involved in this activity. I'm not quite sure why they haven't just made it a hidden frame that loads and is in the browser while they're looking at some other page or something that they clicked on, and it's just attacking in the background where the user really can't see that. I find it interesting. They're still holding on to this kind of crowdsourcing mentality, which is fine. I guess I shouldn't say fine, but it's the way that they have been operating. They're just making it a lot more accessible and easy to use for participants who want to, and they're coercing some people into doing it, are participating, but they're making them aware of it once they are, or at least giving some kind of page that indicates that something's afoot here.
Absolutely.
Well, the scary part comes if they start hiding them in, compromising ad servers or something and hiding the JavaScript in there.
Right. Well, that would be a very different sort of mode of operation here. I think John used the right sort of term here. This is the notion of crowdsourcing here. And, the main sort of diversion that has occurred is that the luring somebody into being a participant is tricky, but it's not trying to hide that fact. Certainly there would be sort of, even from a legal standpoint, I would suspect a different sort of mode of operation or a different sort of activity if users are not being told that their computer is a participant and a part of that denial of service attack. Good discussion here. Thank you. And let's go ahead and thank you very much for that, Matt. Let's go ahead and pass this over to John. And John, I guess you said you have a couple of interesting twists related to malware spam over the last week or so. Is that correct?
All right, yeah, so let's take a look at the trends that we've been seeing in our spam probe accounts. Again, these are accounts that we have specifically set up that aren't real user accounts. So if any email arrives at them, it's unsolicited because it's not a real user account, but it's provisioned on the system. So about the same number of spams that we've normally seen in the past, trending a little bit down from what we saw over the holidays with a lot of the holiday-related spam that was out there. So we're at about 780,000 for the week. This is the past 7 days worth of traffic. In that, we see about 189 spams that definitely were blocked because they were malicious and detected as so by antivirus, and 294 that seemed to slip through. And we'll take a closer look at some of those as well. We're going to take a specific look at one particular sample in particular later on here. In terms of the types of things we're seeing, not much different. RTFs, zips, a little bit of an increase in zips here. I can probably maybe explain why. I think there's a lot of Zeus ones that slipped through this week. Doc files, PDFs, docx's, and those are all those document formats like rich text format, doc, PDF. For the most part, those are all phishing type of activities where they're trying, they say you've won some big lottery or a giveaway. Please fill in this form with all of your personal information, and then we will steal your identity promptly after you send it to us. In any event, so let's move on to the next page here.
But John, is it really theft if somebody volunteers it?
Well,
I digress.
Yeah, we can only people have to be responsible for protecting their own information, but I guess we're trying to bring people's awareness to the fact that they shouldn't be doing that.
Absolutely.
In terms of the general spam, these are the things that topic-wise we're seeing spammed the most. Most of these are not necessarily malicious. They're probably advertisement. There's just bulk spam that's going out there, or phishing campaigns like we've talked about before. We've seen a couple of these ones in here with these semicolon, semicolon, et cetera, et cetera. Those are ones we've talked about in the past, which is another type of scam to earn money at home. work from home, earn lots of money. How you're doing that, I haven't really gone through the path, but I suspect it's probably some shady activity. But no real big changes from what we've normally seen in the activity. In terms of what we have seen get detected and blocked, there's a little bit of a change up here. Some interesting developments, but I think some of them are a little bit erroneous. So in terms of Trojan ZBot, that took the big lion's share of the types of spams that were blocked this week. Most of them all purporting to be a DHL delivery notification, purporting to be from DHL. It's not really. It's a fake email, and if you open it, it's got an attachment inside that will infect you with ZBot, which is a identity password stealing type of Trojan, usually for banking. They want to get your banking accounts or other. They kind of target a lot of things nowadays, but in any event, we've talked about that a lot in the past. Smoller, we've talked about as well. This one is also, I think we've been seeing this trend where they're reporting that your order's been completed. I forget who it's coming from again or who they're purporting it to be from. But pretty much, what was that, Jim?
Amazon.
Oh, is it Amazon? Okay. Yes, I believe you're right. So they're purporting to be Amazon, saying your order's been completed, has some information in there, but in fact you're going to end up with Smoller on your machine. Next one, packed generic 349. These ones also saying order has been completed, order number, blah, blah, blah. I did a little digging on this. It actually looks like packed generic 349 is probably Smoller. So I think this is a missed detection or maybe an early detection before they classified it as Smoller for a new sample that came in. Seemed like that's what was happening here, but I didn't really go look through all the samples. What I can tell is that the format of the emails are exactly the same. The file names are, in fact, the same in most cases. MD5 sums are different. So I think that's just a little bit of a hiccup in the antivirus there.
Well, and often they'll detect the packer even if they can't, if they've made a modification to the packer, they've got the generic routines that'll detect the packer even before it detects the new variant of the underlying Trojan. So. Right.
Good point.
Well, and at least these are the blocked ones, so that's an important sort of, I think, attribute here is that the bad stuff is being blocked regardless of how it gets classified, is it?
Right, that's correct. Well, for the most part, we'll see some of it slip through, which we see all the time, before they get a good detection in place. Early on in the life cycle of a campaign, a few of them will get through, depending on what we see. MyTob, we talked about this before. MyTob is a specific campaign targeting AT&T.net customers of ours. In general, they're purporting to be AT&T, and they're saying there's been some problem with your account. Open this attachment, run this program, or whatever. They'll try to coerce you into doing so by saying, there was an online user violation, your services are near to be closed, your password has been successfully updated. So there's a lot of topics here. Your account is suspended for security reasons. So they're trying to trick the user into thinking, so don't fall for this. We won't contact you with these types of messages. I'm not quite sure how we do contact you, but we won't send you an attachment in an email and ask you to open it with an executable inside. I'm pretty sure of that, or at least I would hope so.
That's true.
Trojan Bablo, never heard of this one before. And when I looked it up, so the message is here again, DHL delivery notification message with some alphanumerics, DHL tracking notification ID with some alphanumerics. Again, this looks a lot like what we saw jumping back to ZBot. Same titles, same subject lines, same body when I actually looked at some of these. So I think this is a little bit of a weird hiccup in the antivirus detection. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but it seems to me that these are probably ZBot samples, but for whatever reason are getting detected by the antivirus vendor. Some other AV vendors are picking it up as ZBot. So that lends me to believe that they're, in general, more of them are picking up as ZBot than Symantec is in this case. Downloader Dromedon, we've talked about that a lot before. Still going strong with their USPS delivery failure notification thread. That was a big one over the holidays. If you remember, we had maybe 1,000 or more of these in a week had been sent. Just truckloads of it was coming in. to the various spam probe accounts we have. It's since tapered down quite a bit now, so it's only this little red slice in our pie chart here, probably 1% or so, but it's still out there.
Were those postal truckloads that were being brought in?
Yes. Yeah, good point. Yes, they were really trucking them in, USPS style.
All right.
Trojan M-Dropper, only a few samples of this. Subject line, second invoice overdue notice. I forget who they're purporting to be in this case, but it was such an insignificant little number of them that I didn't really take a close look at it. Trojan Ransom Lock is another one we haven't seen lately, but it comes up as order has been completed. And I believe this is, again, a misdetection, because I think I looked at this one, if I remember right, this morning, and I think it was the same as one of these other ones that we've already looked at. Yeah, Smoller. So I believe this ransom lock detection, and I believe there's only one of them, believe it or not, and that's why it might even be ranked as 0% or 1%. It looks like a Smoller sample, so I think that's some kind of weird misdetection again in this case. And Kata, again, we've seen this one week after week after week. They're spamming out, sending, would you like to be my friend? If you click on it, you get infected with Kata. And then MyDoom. This one generally purports to be some kind of failed mail transaction. Inside will be an attachment that has the MyDoom payload. And we're actually going to take a closer look at that one, just because some of them still slip through antivirus, which is interesting. So let's take a look at what did make it past the antivirus built into our mail servers and see what got through. We can see that for the most part, and we see this week after week, ZBot was probably one of the largest ones. Again, DHL, UPS delivery notifications. Still a bunch of those getting through, 70, 34 of them for the UPS. We also see some smaller getting through, more groupings of ZBot as well. And again, these are FedEx shipment notifications. I'm not sure what, the statement ready to review is a Fidelity. They're purporting to be Fidelity investments. So another tactic there. And again, it's very likely that these are different people running their own versions of their own little Zeus botnets. Remember, it's a toolkit. People buy it, they build their own, and they come up with their own tactics to distribute it to victims. So it's very possible the person running the Fidelity investment stake campaign here is different than the person running the DHL, UPS, FedEx one. Could be, but I'm speculating. Biblo, again, I think this is a ZBot one. As you can see here, it is coming up as a DHL tracking notification, which is very in line with these other ones. Then there's some other interesting ones. VBS Agent. We actually looked at a variant of this a while back. It's an interesting one. It has some visual basic scripting in it that's heavily obfuscated. We looked at maybe 2 months ago or something. It's still going around, but not in any great amounts. And then there's some other ones rounding out the pack here. Some Dromedon got through. And then at the bottom, we have some of these W32 MyDoom ones. So that's pretty much what we've been seeing lately. Okay. What I wanted to really quickly talk about was going to take a look at one of these MyDoom ones that slipped through and got past the antivirus. And what it comes in as is it appears to be a rejected email. So it looks like you got it was an email that you might have sent, and it got returned to you by a mailer daemon. And inside that returned email, it'll say, I kind of have it overlapped here, but it'll say, this is a mail daemon message. I'm sorry to inform you that this email couldn't be delivered. And it'll have the email as an attachment. It really is an email attachment inside the email. When you open that up, you'll see another email, which is the one that's in the foreground here. And that contains a zip file. And I've kind of highlighted it here on the screen. There'll be a zip file here. If you open that up, we're going to take a look at what you actually see. When you open it up, it will actually show as a file, but it'll have, in here it has a file name that looks like it ends in .htm, if you can kind of see that there. But in reality, there's a ton of spaces that they padded in here, and it ends in .pif, which is actual executable file format. So if you were to double-click on this thinking that it's an HTML and it's just going to open your browser as some kind of email or a report or something or not related to this email, in reality it's going to run a program. What it does, we ran this through our malware analysis, and what it actually does, creates a couple of registry keys, run registry keys to start up. It does so as c:\Windows/Java.exe, so it's trying to hide itself as Oracle's Java virtual machine software. In reality, it's not. It also drops a backdoor Trojan. This is very typical of MyDoom. It drops another Trojan that allows backdoor remote access into the infected host. It's called backdoor Zinsight. That's pretty common for MyDoom to drop that. It listens on port 1034 TCP. So if an attacker or other bots can go check to talk to it, and it keeps kind of a registry of all the other ones it knows about in there. So it has a kind of little interactive interface that they can talk to on that 1034 TCP listener on the infected host and find out who he knows that's also infected and kind of get a sense of how many bots are out there. When it does that, that Zinsight backdoor service is actually another run registry key that gets set up independently as c:\Windows/services.exe. Those are things you'd want to look out for. Then begins a massive amount of email spamming activity. I couldn't get a screenshot of this, but it attempts to start doing lots of MX record DNS lookups for mailer hosts and tries to send tons of spam out. And I probably need to go back. I was preparing this right before the call. I want to get a couple of the samples and show them on the show, but I didn't get a chance to do so, what it's actually spamming out. It also engages in some activity where it goes up to a lot of the search engine sites like Google and search.lycos.com and a few others, like Alta Vista it goes to. And it's using those to search for content and keywords and mail to addresses, believe it or not. So it's using search engines to find places to send to and to pretend that it's as a from address. So it's kind of an interesting little technique they use there.
Mm-hmm. So, John, you said it's sending out massive amounts. Do you know the mode of operation it's working? Is it proxying those spam messages out, or is it originating those from a template that's built in, or do you know?
I didn't get a chance to. I wasn't able to actually see that without really, without pulling it apart even more than I did.
Okay.
And it is doing it. It's not proxying it through some other thing so much as, it really sends it via SMTP.
Mm-hmm.
It's not trying to do it through like a webmail type service or whatnot. It's using SMTP. I just needed to get a chance to kind of pull back some of those and reassemble them to take a look at the spams that it was trying to send out.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So I didn't want to interrupt you. Do you have some more here, John?
Oh, that was it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, what I thought would be perhaps useful is to talk just a moment or two about how this information that you're providing could be used. And, I would have to say if I'm a security-minded person, I know that somebody's running the email services. Perhaps we have an upstream screening or blocking service. Maybe you want to know how well they're doing. Some of the strings that you're picking out here in terms of the subject lines, I don't know that those are strong signatures because there, in fact, may be delivery notifications, subject lines that you want to pick up on. But it might be worth doing a similar type of analysis that you're doing here. Give a little bit of a screen of the emails that are coming inbound to your enterprise, for example. Look for some of these telltale signs, executables that would be indicative of, perhaps bad stuff that's leaking in. And obviously, blocking things farther upstream, having a good provider for doing that, blocking things upstream, is a good way to prevent this type of thing. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, that's a great idea, and that's kind of my intention in kind of presenting this information is hopefully that you'll go back and take some of these nuggets that I'm providing. I can't provide, obviously, detail on every single one that we see, but I try to get the subjects and whatnot. And like you said, searching for subjects, especially with attachments in line with the information I'm providing here, would be a good exercise to run in your own enterprise to kind of see if you any of these are slipping through into your enterprise. We see that some slip through past antivirus prior to antivirus even getting detection. So if you don't have anything instrumented to begin with, they're probably getting spammed into you. Whether users are actually clicking on them and opening them, that's another matter. But it's something that you might want to take a look at in your own enterprise, depending on how large you are as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't resist but put in a couple of shameless plugs here. First of all, on this topic, AT&T does have a secure email gateway service. I would like to point out here that in addition to the analysis that we're doing here, there absolutely is the sort of the malware blocking portion, which is the portion that you're looking at. But there are also other mechanisms that are put into place to help prevent this type of, from a holistic or a profiling point of view, to prevent this type of thing from leaking through. And John, your analysis is very good, but we need to recognize that this is one stage of that blocking process. And also, I neglected to point it out earlier, Matt had talked about the denial of service attacks that are being executed. There are lots of other denial of service attacks that take place that are not related to Anonymous. We talked about specifically some tactics that Anonymous is using. But we also, that is AT&T, has a DDoS defense service that's intended to divert bad traffic away from targets of attack and to, analyze that activity to just pass the good traffic to the customers of that service. So both of those are mechanisms that if you're not sure about what to do for your enterprise, these are the kinds of things that we can help bring to the table for you. And again, I'll go ahead and end that shameless plug. All righty, thank you, John. And I guess what we'll do next here, I'll go ahead and take the reins, and we'll take a look at the Internet Weather Report, looking at the last 7 days of activity on the network. And actually what we're looking at predominantly here is up to January 23rd, at the end of January 23rd, so to put this a little bit into perspective. And I think we reported on this, John, you may have reported on this even in our last episode. Top of the list here is activity. It's scanning activity on port 6515. We'll take a quick look at that in a few minutes here. There are a few things that I want to point out. I have them colored in yellow. One is the ICMP Type 3 activity. I think I may, in fact, have a view graph on this because there is some interest there, but it's colored yellow because it's not a significant threat. It's really backscatter activity associated with denial of service attacks. So we will look at that a little bit. I think I had reported on this next one. I've colored it green, that it's not considered a security activity, but trend activity associated with some legitimate growth in activity. So we'll take a quick look at that just for fun. A couple of others that are colored yellow, again, ICMP Type 0, that is appears to be backscatter, also from a particular type of denial of service attack. There is some activity associated with what's shown here is destination addresses of peers of ours. That is normal growth activity. That is normal activity in new address space that's active, that's not particularly security related. And then at the bottom here, we have basically an increase in what appears to be probing activity on port 22 UDP. Port 22 TCP is used for secure shell SSH. UDP port 22, this appears to be peer-to-peer activity. So, again, does not appear to be specifically security related. So we'll take a closer look at some of these others, but we won't be digging into the details of those that are not really particularly security related, with the exception of we will look at that 16402 just for fun. So looking at again, doubling back to our 6515, we reported on activity associated with this back to actually in early January. And I wanted to provide an update. We now have a little better explanation of what's going on. Apparently, a vulnerability has been discovered in a service that McAfee provides. This is actually their software as a service version of what I think it's their total protection package. And associated with that is a service that they call Rumor, which is really a distribution mechanism, sort of a peer-to-peer distribution of updated signatures, I think. And it turns out that the service that operates on, which is port 6515, apparently has some sort of vulnerability that allows that service to be used as a proxy. And there apparently has been someone that's been using that to be able to relay spam through these servers. And, one of the challenges that spammers are always looking to do is to diversify the sources that they're sending spam from. John just explained an example where the malware, its objective was to be able to send spam. And this is another way that they can diverse that by identifying these vulnerable machines and using those as proxies for spamming. So we'll take a little look at the activity associated with this. And as I said, we've been reporting on, in fact, the early portion of this started in late December. What we're looking at here is actually the number of sources that are doing the scanning activity on this port. So as I mentioned, the vulnerability allows it to be used as a proxy. We're not really observing the proxy activity here. What we're really looking at is probing activity looking for these vulnerable machines. And the vast majority of probes that we see actually comes from a single source address in China. But as you can see here, as news and information about this has come about, there's been I'll call it a very mild increase in the number of sources that are doing the scanning activity. Perhaps there are others that have gained interest because the vulnerability has been exposed. Perhaps there are others that are just simply researchers or, without malicious intent that are curious about how significant this issue might be. So we see an increase in the number of sources that are doing scanning this is looking back 30 days. And the numbers are small. It started out from 0. It's going up to, we pick up on the order of about 40 sources that are scanning at any particular time at the peak. That is very mild, but something we'll be keeping an eye on. So as I'd mentioned, most of the probes are coming from a single source, and you can see here that has not let up to any significant extent. This activity is on the order of about 20 million probes per hour that we're picking up. Obviously, across the Internet, there would be some larger extent that's taking place. There was a pause that took place, but since around January 16th, we've seen some pretty consistent scanning activity there. I suspect that this scanning is one that's most likely associated with, the use of those machines as a proxy. So that would be something to watch out for. The next item, as I said, this ICMP3 activity. That's ICMP3 is basically a message that gets sent back from hosts to indicate that the host is unreachable. It may be a message back from a firewall, for example. What I'm showing here actually is a difference measurement. That is how much activity we are seeing at a particular time relative to what we expect to see. And in this case, we're seeing on the order of, I'll just say at peak here, around 4.5 billion bytes per hour. That's, probably in the hundreds of megabits per second. I didn't do the conversion here. But this is in sort of a typical example of backscatter from a denial of service attack. That is, somebody is being tossed a bunch of packets from addresses that are spoofed from around the Internet, and what we see is some backscatter from that indicates that there's an attack underway. Moving on here, this is innocuous activity or normal growth activity that we're seeing. This is on port 16402 UDP, and I just wanted to sort of point out this is over the last 180 days. I think we reported a similar report just on January 6th or so on this port. It was basically indicating basically a jump in activity. You can see it it's sort of in the darkening of activity here. Right around December 25th, Christmas time. At that time, I had attributed to basically perhaps calling relatives using FaceTime or to chat with relatives, for example, on the holiday. That particular density of activity has curtailed a little bit, but there certainly has been a growth in activity here, likely attributable to increased use of FaceTime and similar kinds of applications. So again, that's legitimate activity, not something to be concerned about. You may see similar growth on your network, and so long as you're okay with peer-to-peer activity, that should be okay. Next item, this is an increase in probing activity. That is the number of probes that we see on port 1234 TCP. I'm showing the last 30 days, and this is actually not probing activity. This is another example of backscatter activity from a denial of service attack. In this case, the target port of the denial of service attack is port 80 TCP. That's a web interface. But what we are seeing here is actually, attack traffic is being sent to the web server. The web server is making an attempt to reply with a SYN-ACK packet. And in the course of doing that, what we're seeing is that SYN-ACK packet coming back. It looks like probing activity in some respects. So you can see that there's been sort of a series of activity. This is sort of started around January, beginning of January 2nd here, rash of it on and off.
So this is a DOS tool that uses a fixed source port as opposed to letting the OS pick the source port.
Absolutely. And there are varieties of this kind of thing that have been going on for some time. This one is a particular set of characteristics and sort of a rash of attacks that showed up relatively recently. Yes. Good point. Next item is increase in the number of sources scanning on port 3306. Port 3306 TCP, that's associated with MySQL database. Showing 30 days of activity here. The significance here, and we'll see that in a moment. Actually, I didn't pull up the graphic, but the number of actual probes on this port has actually gone down significantly over the last 30 days or so. But what we've seen is an increase in the number of sources that are doing that activity. And generally, when you see this kind of thing, it's either a worm propagating or a botnet that is taking control of a number of machines and using those as sort of their puppets, so to speak, to go out and do this scanning and look for vulnerable machines. And so there's been a change in the profile of activity here, increase in the number of sources, but a decrease in the number of probes. And it's not it's a relatively notable decrease in the number of probes that we've seen on this port. But in the end, the effect is the same. There are organizations that are targeting your databases, so it's important to make sure that you have good protections on that, passwords, and avoid having them exposed to the internet to the extent you can. Most of the sources, even in the growth in the number of sources here, most of the sources trace back to China addresses. But there is a significant contribution of probing activity from a set of addresses that are located in Germany. And as I said, over the last 30 days, the number of probes has actually gone down, even though the number of sources doing that has gone up.
Brian, one thing I would like to mention, that the peak there at around the 17th of January corresponds to the quarterly patches from Oracle coming out.
Interesting.
There were some patches that came out on the 17th of January. Okay.
That's interesting. Actually, the next one that we're going to talk about here is actually associated with Oracle SQL. Actually, MySQL is owned by Oracle as well now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And there were patches for the classical Oracle database too, but there were a couple for MySQL this time.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for that clarification, because I did forget that MySQL is owned by the Oracle Corporation. This example is also associated with a SQL database, in this particular, the classic Oracle SQL interface 1521 TCP. Again, this scanning activity is coming from a couple source addresses in China, not a significant number. And obviously, the extent of consistency in the scanning activity here is significantly less. So we have some spikes here and there. 10 million probes here back in at the end of December. Little jumps of 10 million probes or so in an hour. And this is starting around January 20th. We saw a sort of a resurgence in interest in scanning on this port, but nothing really consistent like we see in a lot of other database applications. Now, I haven't verified this. There may be, in fact, only certain versions of SQL that use this Oracle SQL that use this port for access. And so they may be, in fact, looking for some older versions. Again, it's not something I've investigated in depth. So in any case, same rules apply. If you have a database, try not to expose it to the Internet. And if you do, make sure you are very sensitive about the security issues with that.
Yeah, all the current versions still use 1521.
They still? Okay, thank you, Jim. Okay, and to sort of sum it up, this is just a snapshot from January 23rd of activity that we've seen through the course of the day. So as we were talking about anomalies in the previous set of view graphs here, what we're looking at here are, just the normal set of probing activity we see on the network. The normal ones show up, port 445, 1433, which is Microsoft SQL database. And we talked about 6515 TCP. 3389 is still up there. We talked about earlier pcAnywhere, but this one happens to be remote desktop protocol, so there's a lot of probing activity looking for ways to get to remote desktop applications. Naturally, and this is, you might expect this to some extent, there is probing activity looking for we would expect to be looking for web servers that are potentially exploitable, whether or not they show up in search tools. And there's always password guessing activity against port 22, port 23, so you get an idea. So this is looking at it from the ports that are probed the most times. And last but not least, we'll take a quick look at the ports that have the most sources probing them. And far and above, port 445 wins on this one. This is, again, remnant conficker infections, one of the worst infections that has promulgated on the Internet and continues to infect machines, and also continues to propagate through USB devices and such. So when these devices get infected, they tend to go probing out on port 445, looking for others that they can infect. But we also see there's still a significant number of sources probing on port 23. I'm going to guess 15. Actually, I'm remiss here. I don't know what 1562 is, so I'll have to follow up on that one. But some of these others we've talked about many times in the past. And, we don't talk about it very much, but there is an awful lot of probing activity that takes place on ICMP type 8. That's a ping request, effectively. So in many cases, what the worms will do is they'll go out, probe an ICMP. If they see a host that responds to ICMP, then they'll start probing on other ports to see what ports it responds to, and if there's an exploit in its repertoire, it'll try to use those exploits. So there are other types of threats that exist. The number of sources that are doing that type of thing these days is significantly lower than it had been in the past. So with that, I'll just put in a final request. Any comments or questions from the rest of the team here? Alrighty, so as always, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder, if you want to contact us, you can email us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. And on behalf of Jim, Matt, and John, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and have a good week and keep your network safe.